You check your bank account every morning. You watch interest rates on the news. You worry about inflation eating your paycheck. But here's what nobody tells you. The money in your account, the currency you work for, the debt that shapes your future, none of it emerged naturally. It was engineered by a small circle of families over 100 years ago. And their descendants still sit at the center of the system today. The 2008 financial crisis wiped out $8 trillion of American household wealth. Millions lost their homes. Retirement accounts vanished. But the banks that caused it, they got 700 billion in bailouts, and within 5 years they were bigger than before the crisis. The Federal Reserve pumped trillions into the system, and almost all of it flowed to the top. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't corruption. This was the system working exactly as designed, because the system was never built to serve you. It was built to serve the people who created it. A century before, 2008, before the Fed even existed, there was a financial panic that almost destroyed the American economy. The panic of 1907, banks collapsed, the stock market crashed. People rioted in the streets demanding their deposits, and one man stepped in to save the system, J.P. Morgan, not the government, one private banker. He locked a group of other bankers in his library and refused to let them leave until they agreed to pool their money and stop the panic. It worked. Morgan became a hero. And 6 years later, those same bankers wrote the law that created the Federal Reserve. Think about that. The people who caused the crisis, the people who profited from saving the crisis, those same people designed the institution that would control American money forever. Not elected officials, not public servants, bankers, and the families behind those banks understood something most people never see. Whoever controls the currency controls the country. Whoever issues the credit holds the power. And if you can make your control permanent, if you can build it into law and wrap it in legitimacy, you can extract wealth from an entire civilization for generations. This is that story, the story of how a small network of banking families turned the dollar into the most powerful financial weapon in history. How they used wars, crashes, and crises to centralize control. How they laundered their power through foundations and philanthropy. And how they built a system where governments borrow from them, where global trade depends on their currency, and where ordinary people have no choice but to participate. The names on the door have changed. The mechanisms have evolved, but the core structure remains. And if you want to understand why your dollar buys less every year, why governments can never seem to control spending, why financial crises always end with the same institutions getting stronger, you need to understand how this empire was built. Let's go back to 1895. America is transforming. Railroads are cutting across the continent. Factories are rising in every major city. Oil fields are gushing in Pennsylvania and Texas. Fortunes are being made at a speed the world has never seen. Rockefeller controls 90% of American oil refining. Carnegie dominates steel production. Vanderbilt owns the railroads. These men are building empires, and they all need one thing: money. Lots of it. And there's only one place that kind of capital exists: New York. Specifically a few blocks of lower Manhattan that would become Wall Street. This is where the banking families operate. Not out of towering glass buildings, out of brownstone offices with brass nameplates. These aren't flashy men. They don't give interviews. They don't run for office. They operate behind closed doors, in private clubs, in boardrooms where deals are made with handshakes and sealed over cigars. And the most powerful of them all is J.P. Morgan. John Pierpont Morgan isn't just a banker, he's a financial architect. His father built a banking empire in London, working with European capital. JP brings that model to America. He doesn't just lend money, he reorganizes entire industries. When railroads go bankrupt and collapse into chaos, Morgan steps in. He buys the debt, he forces the owners out, he installs new management, he merges competing lines, he creates monopolies, and when it's done, he owns a piece of everything and collects a fee on every transaction. By 1900, Morgan controls more capital than the U.S. Treasury. That's not an exaggeration. The federal government has a limited budget. Morgan can move money from London, Paris, and Berlin. He can finance wars. He can stabilize currencies. And in 1895, he proves it. The United States is running out of gold. The Treasury's reserves are nearly empty. If they run out completely, the dollar becomes worthless. President Grover Cleveland is desperate. He goes to Congress for help. Congress refuses. So Cleveland goes to Morgan, and Morgan makes a deal. He'll organize a private syndicate to buy U.S. government bonds and inject gold into the Treasury. In exchange, Morgan and his partners make a profit on the bonds. The government is saved, but now the United States of America owes its financial stability to a private banker. This moment is critical. It establishes a principle. When the government is in crisis, private bankers will save it. But they'll do it on their terms, and those terms always involve profit and control. Morgan's syndicate doesn't just rescue the Treasury. They position themselves as indispensable. The next time there's a crisis, the government will come to them again. And the crisis comes in 1907. That year, a speculative bubble bursts. Banks have been lending recklessly, financing stock speculation with depositor money. When prices collapse, depositors panic and rush to withdraw their cash. But banks don't keep enough cash on hand. They've lent it all out. One bank fails, then another, then another. The panic spreads. The stock market crashes. Credit freezes. The economy is hours away from total collapse. And there's no Federal Reserve, no central bank, no government institution with the power to stop it. So once again, J.P. Morgan steps in. He gathers the most powerful bankers in New York in his private library. He locks the doors, literally locks them, and he tells them they're not leaving until they agree to pool their resources and stop the panic. They argue, they resist. But Morgan is 70 years old and commands absolute respect. At midnight, he puts a funding agreement on the table and tells them to sign. They sign. The next morning, money flows. The panic stops. The economy stabilizes. And Morgan is hailed as the savior of American finance. But here's what people miss. Morgan didn't save the economy out of charity. He saved it because he owned pieces of almost every major bank and corporation that would have collapsed. His personal fortune was at stake, and more. Importantly, he saw an opportunity. The 1907 panic exposed a structural weakness. America's financial system was unstable. It depended on a handful of men making private decisions in moments of crisis. This couldn't continue. The country needed a permanent solution, a central bank, and Morgan and his allies were perfectly positioned to design it. In November 1910, a secret meeting takes place on Jekyll Island, a private resort off the coast of Georgia. The public isn't told about this meeting. The press isn't invited. Even the names of the attendees are kept secret. 7 men arrive separately, using only first names to avoid recognition. One of them is Senator Nelson Aldrich, chairman of the National Monetary Commission and one of the wealthiest men in the Senate. Another is Frank Vanderlip, president of National City Bank, which will one day become Citibank. Another is Paul Warburg, a partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company, representing European banking interests. Another is Benjamin Strong, a lieutenant of J.P. Morgan, who will later become the first head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. These men spend 9 days drafting a proposal for a central banking system. They write in secret because they know the public doesn't trust banks, especially big New York banks. There's a populist movement demanding that control of money stay with the people, not private financiers. So the men at Jekyll Island craft a solution that looks public but operates privately. They call it the Federal Reserve System. Not a central bank, a system. It sounds decentralized, democratic, but the structure they design ensures that private banks control the operation. Here's how it works. The Federal Reserve will be owned by private banks, not the government. Private member banks will buy shares and elect regional directors. The Board of Governors will be appointed by the President, giving it a veneer of public accountability. But the real power will sit in the regional banks, especially the New York Fed, which handles international operations and holds the largest gold reserves, and Benjamin Strong, Morgan's man, will run it. The structure is brilliant. It gives private bankers control over the money supply while making it look like a government institution. The public sees a federal agency, but the profits and decisions flow through private banks. In 1913, Congress passes the Federal Reserve Act. President Woodrow Wilson signs it into law. The official story is that America finally has a stable, scientific, apolitical institution to manage currency and prevent panics. The real story is that the banking families who caused the 1907 panic just wrote themselves a legal monopoly over American money. And within a few years, they'll use that power to finance the largest war in human history. World War I breaks out in 1914. European powers need money desperately. Britain and France are bleeding gold. Germany is printing marks to fund the war, and America, protected by an ocean and rich in resources, becomes the world's creditor. J. P. Morgan and Co. becomes the official purchasing agent for Britain and France. Every gun, every shell, every uniform, every ton of food goes through Morgan's bank. The firm takes a commission on every transaction, and they arrange the loans that finance it. By 1917, American banks have lent over $2 billion to the Allies. That's $50 billion in today's money, and almost all of it flows through Morgan and a handful of connected firms. But there's a problem. If Germany wins, those loans will never be repaid. Britain and France will be ruined. The banks will collapse. The families that finance the war will lose everything. So the bankers need America to enter the war, not just for idealism, not just for democracy, for money. And in April 1917, America joins the war. The official reason is German submarine attacks. The real reason is that the financial elite cannot afford an Allied defeat. Treasury Secretary William McAdoo, who happens to be President Wilson's son-in-law, issues Liberty bonds to fund the war. The Federal Reserve buys these bonds, creating new money out of thin air. It's the first large-scale use of the Fed's power. And it works. America finances the Allies. Germany loses. The loans are repaid. And the banking families that took the risk make enormous profits. But the war does something even more valuable. It shifts financial power from London to New York. Before 1914, the British pound was the world's reserve currency. London was the center of global finance. But the war drains Britain. They sell assets. They liquidate gold. They borrow from America. And by 1918, New York holds more gold and capital than London. The dollar is rising, and the families that control the Fed understand exactly what this means. The reserve currency is the currency the world uses for trade and savings. Whoever issues the reserve currency can print money, and the rest of the world has to accept it. It's the ultimate power. And for the next 30 years, those families will work methodically to make the dollar that currency. The 1,920 seconds are a boom. Stock prices soar, credit expands, fortunes are made. But it's built on leverage. Banks are lending to stock speculators who are buying on margin. The whole structure is fragile. And in 1929, it collapses. The stock market crashes, banks fail, unemployment hits 25%. The Great Depression destroys the American economy. And just like in 1907, just like in 1893, the crisis leads to more centralization. Thousands of small banks go under, but the biggest banks survive. Why? Because they have access to Federal Reserve credit. The Fed provides liquidity to member banks. Small regional banks that aren't in the system fail. Big New York banks that are in the system get support. By 1933, the number of American banks has dropped by more than a third. That's not consolidation. That's elimination. And the survivors, the banks tied to the old, families grow stronger. They buy the failed banks for pennies. They absorb the deposits. They expand their control. President Franklin Roosevelt takes office in 1933 and immediately seizes private gold. Executive Order 6102 makes it illegal for Americans to own gold except in small amounts for jewelry. Citizens have to turn in their gold to the government in exchange for paper dollars at a fixed rate of about $20 per ounce. Then, once the government has collected the gold, Roosevelt raises the official price to $35 per ounce. The government just devalued everyone's savings by 40% overnight. And where does that gold go? Into the vaults of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, controlled by the same banking system. But the Depression reveals something the bankers already know. The dollar can't be the global reserve currency if it's just another national currency. It needs institutional backing. It needs to be tied to something bigger than America. It needs a global system. And World War II gives them the opportunity to build it. By 1944, the war is ending. Europe is destroyed. Asia is in ruins. America is untouched and holds 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. Representatives from 44 countries meet in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design the post war financial system, and the Americans dictate the terms. The agreement is simple. All currencies will be pegged to the dollar. The dollar will be pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. The dollar becomes the anchor. Every country that wants to trade internationally has to hold dollars, and only the United States can print dollars. This is the moment the dollar empire is born, not through conquest, through finance. The structure ensures that every country needs dollars to buy oil, food, and goods. They have to sell their products to America or borrow dollars from American banks. And the dollars they earn get deposited back into New York, where the same banking families manage them. It's a closed loop, a perpetual money machine, and it's all perfectly legal. The families behind this system don't need to own every bank anymore. They own the system itself. They sit on the boards of the Federal Reserve regional banks. They manage the Treasury's debt auctions. They advise presidents. They fund think tanks that shape economic policy. And they build philanthropic empires that buy legitimacy. Look at the foundations: the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment, the Ford Foundation. These aren't just charitable organizations. They're policy machines. They fund university economics departments that teach generations of students that central banking is scientific and necessary. They endow chairs in international relations that promote dollar hegemony as stabilizing and benevolent. They finance think tanks that produce papers arguing for financial deregulation, free capital flows, and open markets, all of which benefit the banking system. And just like the Sassoon family built libraries to hide opium profits, these families build museums, hospitals, and concert halls. The Rockefeller name is on medical schools. The Morgan Library is a cultural landmark. Carnegie Hall is one of the most famous performance venues in the world. Generations grow up seeing these names and thinking, pillars of society, great Americans, visionaries. Nobody asks where the money came from. Nobody talks about the monopolies, the wars financed, the debt imposed on governments. The buildings stand, the names remain, and the system continues. By the 1960 seconds, cracks start to show. The Bretton Woods system depends on trust. Other countries hold dollars because they believe they can exchange them for gold. But America is printing more dollars than it has gold to back. The Vietnam War is expensive. The Great Society programs are expensive. Dollars flood the world, and foreign governments start to notice. France's Charles de Gaulle calls the bluff. In 1965, he starts converting dollars to gold. Other countries follow. The gold reserves at Fort Knox start to drain. In 1971, President Richard Nixon ends gold convertibility. Just ends it. No warning, no negotiation. He goes on television and announces that dollars can no longer be exchanged for gold. The Bretton Woods system is dead, and the dollar is now backed by nothing but the promise of the U.S. government. It's a gamble, a massive one. If countries abandon the dollar, the whole empire collapses, but it doesn't collapse. Because the banking families and their allies in government engineer a replacement, the petrodollar. In 1974, Treasury Secretary William Simon flies to Saudi Arabia and cuts a deal. Saudi Arabia will sell oil only in dollars. In exchange, America will provide military protection and buy Saudi government bonds. Within a few years, every OPEC nation follows. Oil, the most essential commodity on Earth, can only be bought with dollars. Every country needs oil, so every country needs dollars. The dollar's dominance is secured again, not by gold, by oil, and by the military force to protect the arrangement. This is the hidden engine of American power. It's not democracy. It's not innovation. It's monetary control. Because the world runs on dollars, America can print money and export inflation. When the Fed creates new dollars, the rest of the world absorbs the loss of purchasing power. America runs trade deficits for decades, importing more than it exports, and it doesn't collapse because those deficits are paid in dollars that America prints. No other country can do this. If any other country tried, their currency would collapse. But the dollar is special, and the families that built the system understand this. They've turned American government debt into the safest, most liquid asset in the world, Treasury bonds. And the biggest holders of Treasury bonds are the big banks, the asset managers, the financial institutions that trace their lineage back to those original families. Today, the largest asset managers in the world, firms like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, collectively manage over $20 trillion. That's more than the GDP of every country except the United States and China. And if you look at who owns them, if you trace the shares and the board connections, you find the same names, the same networks, the same schools, the same clubs. It's not a conspiracy, it's a class. A financial aristocracy that moves through revolving doors between banks, the Treasury, the Fed, and corporate boards. They don't need to meet in secret anymore. They own the institutions. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, those institutions were bailed out. Not because they were too big to fail, because the people running the government came from those institutions and would return to them. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson was the former CEO of Goldman Sachs. Fed Chair Ben Bernanke had been advising banks for years. The bailouts weren't corruption. They were the system protecting itself. And it worked. The banks were rescued. The losses were socialized. Taxpayers paid. And the same institutions emerged bigger and more powerful. Since 2008, central banks around the world have created over $25 trillion in new money through quantitative easing. Almost all of it went to financial markets. Stock prices tripled. Bond prices soared. Real estate exploded. And who owns those assets? The top 10%. The same families, the same institutions, the same class that built the system a century ago. Wealth inequality is now the highest it's been since the 1920 seconds. Not by accident, by design, because the system rewards whoever is closest to the money printer. And the families that built the Fed made sure they'd always be closest. So what should you take from this? First, understand that the dollar's dominance was engineered. It didn't happen because America makes the best products or has the freest markets. It happened because a network of banking families used wars and crises to centralize control and lock in their advantage. The Federal Reserve wasn't created to serve the public. It was created to protect banks. Bretton Woods wasn't designed to help the world. It was designed to make every country dependent on dollars. The petrodollar wasn't about energy security. It was about monetary control. Every step was calculated. Second, legitimacy is bought. Just like the Sassoons laundered opium money through libraries, American banking families laundered financial power through foundations, universities, and think tanks. The narratives you hear about free markets, sound money, and scientific central banking weren't discovered, they were funded. Entire schools of economic thought were shaped by foundation grants. Generations of policymakers were trained in programs endowed by financial elites. This doesn't mean every economist is corrupt. It means the acceptable range of debate was narrowed by who paid for the research. Third, the cycle. Repeats, crisis, bailout, consolidation, philanthropy. It happened in 1907, in 1929, in 2008, and it will happen again. Each time, the biggest institutions survive. The small players are wiped out, and control concentrates further. The families don't need to own everything anymore. They own the system. And the system protects them. Fourth, debt is the product. The dollar empire doesn't run on goods. It runs on bonds. Government debt, corporate debt, household debt. The more debt, the more dollars in circulation. The more dollars in circulation, the more the world depends on the system. And the more the world depends on the system, the more power flows to the institutions that manage it. This is why the debt never gets paid down. It's not supposed to. Debt is control. Fifth, you can't opt out. Your salary is in dollars. Your savings are in dollars. Your retirement is in dollar-denominated assets. Even if you buy stocks or real estate, those prices are set in dollars. The system is inescapable. And every year, your dollar buys less because the people who control issuance benefit from inflation. They borrow cheap, inflate away the debt, and saddle you with the loss. It's not a mistake, it's the model. The families that built this system are mostly invisible now. The names have diffused through trusts, foundations, and corporations. But the structures remain. The Federal Reserve still operates as a private-public hybrid. The big banks still have access to unlimited Fed credit. Treasury debt is still the anchor of global finance. And the same revolving door still spins between Wall Street and Washington. When the next crisis comes, and it will come, watch what happens. Watch who gets rescued. Watch which institutions grow stronger. Watch how the losses are distributed. And you'll see the same pattern. The system protecting itself because that's what it was designed to do. The Sassoons built libraries and docks. The American banking families built universities and museums. Both used philanthropy to buy silence. Both wrapped exploitation in respectability. And both left behind institutions that still carry their names, long after most people forgot how the money was made. The difference is scale. The Sassoons controlled opium. These families control the dollar, and the dollar controls the world.